Survivors of the residential schools sharing their stories led to the formation of the Canadian Truth and Reconciliation Commission, or the TRC. The Truth and Reconciliation Commission was formed as a means of reckoning with the devastating legacy of forced assimilation and abuse left by the residential school system. They began by listening to stories of residential school survivors, like Phyllis Webstad. Thousands of survivors spoke out about the neglect and many forms of abuse that they had endured and the significant impact that this trauma continued to have on their lives. In 2015, the TRC released a report which included 94 calls to action regarding child welfare, education, language and culture, health, justice, and reconciliation, so that Indigenous peoples can begin to heal from the immense mistreatment they have suffered at the hands of the Canadian government for generations. The federal government has responded to some of these calls to action, but others have yet to be addressed. In 2018, CBC News launched a website called Beyond 94, which keeps track of the government's progress in addressing these points. CBC News reviewed their progress again in 2021 and continue to update periodically. In 2021, hundreds of unmarked graves were discovered on the grounds of a former residential school in Kamloops. These were revealed to be the final resting places of the Indigenous children who were taken from their homes and their parents, forced to speak a foreign language and practice a new religion, all the while suffering from abuse, neglect, malnourishment, and disease. These children were forcibly removed from their homes, never to return. As a nation, Canada grieved for these silenced Indigenous children, as thousands more unmarked graves were discovered at multiple residential school sites all across the country. The outrage that came with the grief led Parliament to pass the bill making September 30th, which is Orange Shirt Day, a statutory federal holiday, now called National Day for Truth and Reconciliation, an answer to one of the 94 calls to action. September 30th, 2021 was the first one to be observed. The purpose of National Day for Truth and Reconciliation is to listen and commemorate residential school survivors and to learn about and value Indigenous cultures. So, what are Ontario students currently learning about Indigenous peoples at school? Under the Ontario curriculum, it is mandatory for students to learn about residential schools, treaties, colonialism, and its legacy, and the rights and responsibilities we all have to each other as treaty people. These topics are outlined in the curriculum in consultation with Indigenous partners. In the Halton District School Board, the acknowledgement of land and territory is spoken out loud before all meetings and events. It was developed in consultation with Indigenous peoples. Halton, as we know it today, is rich in history and modern traditions of many First Nations and the Métis, from the Anishinaabe to the Atawarandan, the Haudenosaunee, and the Métis. These lands surrounding the Great Lakes are steeped in Indigenous history. As we gather today on these treaty lands, we have the responsibility to honor and respect the four directions: land, waters, plants, animals, ancestors that walked before us, and all the wonderful elements of creation that exist. We would like to acknowledge and thank the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation for sharing their traditional territory with us. Part of the 94 calls to action included modifications to the school curriculum so that children have the opportunity to learn about Indigenous perspectives in subjects like social studies, history, geography, and Canadian and world studies. These changes to the curriculum were made in consultation with Indigenous peoples. In the previously mentioned subjects, it is now mandatory that students learn about Indigenous perspectives, cultures, and histories. Students also have the opportunity to learn about Indigenous peoples' contributions to the arts, literature, humanities, law, and politics. The Government of Ontario has also designated the first week of November to be Treaties Recognition Week, in order to promote education and awareness about treaties and treaty relationships. How can educational assistance support Indigenous communities and reconciliation in the school setting? The People for Education report highlights the challenges and opportunities for improving Indigenous education in Canada. Educational assistance can contribute to addressing these challenges by supporting the implementation of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's calls to action related to education, promoting the use of Indigenous languages and cultural practices in the classroom, ensuring that Indigenous students receive equitable access to resources and services, creating a safe and inclusive learning environment that recognizes and celebrates Indigenous cultures and identities, advocating for the inclusion of Indigenous knowledge systems and perspectives in curriculum and pedagogy. By taking these actions, educational assistance can play a critical role in supporting the process of reconciliation and promoting positive outcomes for Indigenous students. Additionally, educational assistance can help by supporting the creation of inclusive learning environments. They can promote respect, understanding, and appreciation of Indigenous cultures and history, ensure a safe and welcoming space for Indigenous students. They can infuse Indigenous perspectives into the curriculum by collaborating with teachers to provide input on lesson plans, developing and implementing culturally relevant materials and resources, building positive relationships with Indigenous students and their families, learning about their cultures, traditions, and languages, and acting as a liaison between schools and Indigenous communities. They can advocate for equity and inclusion by promoting awareness of Indigenous issues and histories within the school community and eliminating any barriers that prevent Indigenous students from achieving academic success. We can engage in ongoing professional development by seeking out ongoing professional development opportunities, such as workshops, conferences, or other training sessions. We can do this by participating in self-directed learning. As educators, we can consult experts in the field to further our own education. It is our responsibility to our students to be informed about relevant educational material, such as Indigenization. The Legacy Schools Program website is a great resource for educators. It is funded by the Gord Downey and Cheney Wenjack Fund, a charitable organization. The Legacy Schools Program is a free national initiative to engage, empower, and connect students and educators to further reconciliation through awareness, education, and action. I believe they call this Reconciliation. Their website features a plethora of Indigenous educational resources across many different topics, grade levels, and school subjects. As educators, we are responsible for ensuring that we present accurate material to our students. The Legacy Schools program suggests the use of this checklist for educators to determine whether to use an Indigenous learning resource. Indigenous peoples have been involved in the development and vetting of resources. Information accurately reflects Indigenous knowledge, perspectives, and teachings, and you have permission to use it. Resources reference local Indigenous peoples in your community where possible. Indigenous worldviews and cultural differences between nations are evident. Indigenous people are not stereotyped, portrayed in a negative tone, given a subtle bias or paternalism, which is a sense of non-Indigenous superiority. The use of language and terminology is appropriate, and Indigenous perspective is evident. On Monday, April 24th of this year, the Burlington Center for the Performing Arts is hosting a seminar for educators to learn about how to teach their students about reconciliation. Registration is open to educators of all grades, and tickets cost $25. During the seminar, educators will learn about the Legacy Schools program from keynote speakers and experience a musical performance. We included this information to inform our classmates about opportunities to learn from experts and become better educators. This concludes our presentation about the importance of Indigenous education in Ontario schools. Here are the references we used. Thank you and have a wonderful day.